Let's get across the events of the day out of Canberra. And to do that, I'm joined now by the Australian's foreign editor, Greg Sheridan. Greg, thank you as always on this Thursday. It's a momentous day, actually. It's the end of the climate wars, we're told. That's Labor's view. I'm a bit more fearful that they've just invited the Greens into our economic and security future, given the whip hand they've had over this legislation. Where are we up to, do you think?
Well, Peter, I think you're absolutely right. The climate wars aren't finished. What a ridiculous bit of nonsense that is. It's a kind of state religion ABC propaganda line, really. It bears no relation to reality. Look around the world. Western Europe is in dreadful energy crisis, emerging directly out of their net zero ambitions. In Britain, Liz Truss is about to become the Conservative Prime Minister. She's promised to repeal green levies, repeal green energy levies. Conservative members are calling on her to pause net zero. In the United States, Joe Biden is about to lose the House of Representatives, which will put all of his climate policies into complete reverse. And the only people who are doing all this climate stuff in any event are Western Europe, North America and us. I mean, developing Asia and Africa and so on, they're just not doing any of this stuff. So the climate wars don't finish until clean energy is economically viable. And it's not economically viable at the moment. It's not technically viable. You can't base your energy on renewable energy because it's not available all the time. It's very expensive. And, people say it's cheap, but it's only cheap if you don't have to provide any of the backup. So, this is one episode in it. They've got a bit of legislation passed. I thought Albanese has done pretty well to keep the madness moderate, so to speak, but there's a lot of madness out there. And, the announcement of the death of the climate wars is premature.
I want to get your take on Bridget Archer. She's the Liberal member for the Tasmanian seat of Bass, or she is at least on paper. But if you look at all her positions, I mean, she threatened to cross the floor at in the last Parliament with Labor on their Integrity Commission. She has crossed the floor on religious freedom. She's pushing gender quotas for female MPs. I mean, she's a fraud, I have to say, because a couple of months ago, she crossed the floor today and voted with Labor, but only a couple of months ago she went to the election, asked the people of Bass, vote for me, I've got a 26 to 28% target. Well, today she backed a 43% target. I reckon she's a teal, not a Liberal.
Well, you make a very fair point, Peter. I think you could make very similar points about Andrew Bragg. But I've been very perplexed by the comments of the last 24 hours of Simon Birmingham. He says, so he's the leader of the Liberals in the Senate, and he says if the government required this legislation to achieve their 43% target, he would cross the floor in a minute to support this legislation. So that means he has declared himself in support of a 43% target and said he would cross the floor to do it. And yet he too went to the last election campaigning for a 26 to 28% target. His party has not yet settled on a larger target, and he's a member of the leadership group who is surely supposed to maintain shadow cabinet solidarity. So if you, Peter, could explain to me how that works, I'd be very grateful.
Well, it's called gutless because if that's his genuine view, if he does back in a 43% target, he should cross the floor and go with his convictions and resign from the front bench. But you can't have a bob each way. You can't stick to your front bench job and the salary and the status that it comes with, including, you rightly point out, the leader of the opposition in the Senate, but say he backs it in anyway. I mean, Peter Dutton should haul him in and have a pretty frank word with him. Which brings me to the point, I suppose. This is the first fortnight of a new parliament. Plenty of lowlights, some highlights. I'll get your take on the government and the opposition and how both leaders have gone. I have to say, for me, the absolute highlight was Jacinta Price, and the absolute lowlight was Lydia Thorpe and that Black Power salute. But give us your take.
I agree with you about Jacinta Price. I thought that was a magnificent speech. I wrote that I thought it was the Gettysburg Address of Australia. Every Australian should read this speech. Every media group should publish it in full on their websites. I think it's a historic speech. And she is the future of conservative politics in Australia, or liberal conservative politics, if you like, or whatever label you want to use it for non-Labor politics. I mean, there was conviction, principle, reality there. For the 2 weeks overall, as you'd expect, I think the government has had the better of it. That's what you'd expect with a new government. I think Albo is proving to be pretty impressive, quite frankly. Not so much all of his front bench. I mean, Christopher Bowen seems to be on the brink of a nervous breakdown all the time. And, you know, most of his front benchers won't publicly support his moderation in a lot of key critical issues. I think he's been very good on defence and international affairs as well. Peter Dutton, I think, has been perfectly good as the opposition leader. He's been dealt a pretty crummy hand. He's got a pretty ordinary front bench and a pretty ordinary back bench. And he's got a party which is terribly confused about what it stands for, if anything at all. And but that's, I guess that's what you expect after 9 years in government and a change of government. The final point I'd make to you, though, is the vote today was very interesting. With all those Teals voting with Labor, the vote was about 90 to 55. I think that is actually Labor's real majority. It's got an actual majority in its own right, so the Teals can't, you know, be mischievous with it in the House of Representatives. But on any contentious issue, the Teals are going to go with Labor. So this is not really a close result for Labor. This is a big majority for a left of centre government.
Spot on, Greg. Hey, just quickly, this defence review, I read your column in The Australian. You are very much in support of it. I have a caveat about the appointment of Stephen Smith, given he gutted defence when he was the minister. But what's your take of the overarching need for this review?
Look, I think this is a good review. The previous government, I supported them for many, many years, but they lost me in the end because they were 9 years in government and they delivered nothing on capability. This government has commissioned this very quick and dirty review. It's going to report fully by March. It's not a big cumbersome thing like a white paper. Stephen Smith was responsible for low defence spending, but everyone had a different view on China and strategic issues 10 years ago. And defence spending was pretty anaemic under the Howard government too. It never reached 2% of GDP, and it took the most
hang on, Greg, I've got to jump in there though.
9 years.
He ripped about $70 billion out of the intelligence agencies after there was a big review saying they absolutely needed to scale up. And that's on the back of all the Al-Qaeda stuff. And we didn't have the resources when we then had the Islamic State issue fall on the government's table. So you're a bit kind to Stephen Smith.
You make a fair point, Peter. And at the time, I was immensely critical of these budget cuts. So I was saying other people didn't do so well either, but I agree with you. I take your point. And in fact, Andrew Hastie rang me and pointed out a column I'd written saying that Stephen Smith's defence budget was the worst day for Australian security since the fall of Saigon. So it's a very fair point you make. All I'm saying is, though, that we've all moved on a long way since then. I've known Stephen Smith by attending a lot of conferences with him since he's left office, and I think he is absolutely fully seized of the urgency of the China challenge. He knows the area very well. I think he and Angus Houston are two very good men. But my point is, though, that the Albanese government wants to produce quick results. So everything that Morrison promised us in defence happens on a Star Trek time frame. You know, these nuclear subs are going to come when my grandson is going to be too old to serve in them, you know. The frigates, God knows when they're arriving. This review is focused on what can we do straight away? What can we do in the next couple of years? And that's when we're going to need it in the next few years. Now, you still got only pay on results, so you've got to see what they actually deliver. But so far, I think they're pushing in the right direction. If they'd gone for a white paper taking 2 years or something, I'd be in despair. But I'm have a little bit of hope because of this.
We'll see what lands in March. You've got me on Houston, not so on Stephen Smith, but we'll keep coming back to that. Greg Sheridan, as always, thank you.